if I break the chain, one of two things may be happening. One, I'm just sort of becoming a wet blanket. I'm going to let anything and everything happen to me. I'm not going to set boundaries. I'm not going to fight for equity or justice. Or two, that release, it feels really like it literally feels scary in the body. Like there's that protection where like if I'm amped up, if I've kind of got my dukes up, I'm always on in that activated perpetual state. There is a level of at least somewhat perceived protection. Mm-hmm. And to release that, I think for many of us feels incredibly defenseless.
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. Okay, so we are here. I'm joined by Evan and Camille. Marika thought it was the perfect timing to go on a birthday trip. And when she looked at the schedule last week, we were having a meeting. She's like, okay, the meeting on Monday, the podcast is curiosity and empathy. Sounds great to me. And I'm like, there's a word before it. And I guess her screen was small, so she couldn't see the word before it. And she said, oppressor, curiosity, and empathy. Who has that? I said, that's what we're going to be playing with. She's like, I'm not coming to that one. It's my birthday. I'm staying home. So we are doing this with you in mind, Marika, but we're not going to have our comedic relief. I'm afraid it's going to be two serious Virgos and a Virgo presenting Leo having this conversation with us. What are you going to say, Camille?
No, just laughing. Virgo presenting Leo.
He's so Virgo presenting, isn't he? So where do you want to start? What do we feel like where do we dive in on this? Actually, I'll start with what we just said. I just want to start by saying what fascinates me about this topic is the fear that if you empathize or understand or have any feelings for somebody who does something wrong, that somehow you condone it or you allow it or you stick up for it. And maybe we could just start there. Can we just start by teasing what we mean when we say curiosity and empathy for the oppressor? Because the oppressed, very easy to have curiosity and empathy there. You don't have to look very far for that. That's everywhere. What I don't see being talked about is the curiosity of what made this person dominate or oppress or abuse this other person. So let's tease that out together, Camille.
Yeah. So for me, this goes back to two things that sort of guide particularly my approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Which we're doing a whole session on. We're going to do a podcast, Camille and I, about this. I'm excited. Go ahead.
And I've shared this on some other episodes. And if you've been in the HLN space, you probably heard me refer to Yoda. He is one of my teachers up there with Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad. But his quote where he says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. So for me, there's always, when I encounter suffering, or particularly when I encounter hate, when I encounter anger, it has been helpful for me to get curious about what are they afraid of? And even in some cases, they might not even know what they're afraid of, or at least it feels scary to admit what you're actually afraid of. So they may not have the ability to articulate their fears to themselves, let alone to anyone else. But that's sort of one of the things I like to notice. What is the underlying fear, the perceived threat motivating the behavior? And then the other thing that brings up for me is, we like to say, trauma explains behavior. It doesn't excuse it. And I think a lot of people overcome. They think, well, if we're talking about trauma, we're talking about the cause, we're excusing the behavior. Absolutely not. I can have curiosity. I can witness. I can ask questions about what may have led us to this point and still say, that's fucked up. Don't do that again. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, at least for me.
Yeah, agreed. And I want to dive into this in a minute, but what does it do for you as a human, somatically, spiritually, day to day, when you have empathy and curiosity for someone who oppresses, specifically within a framework of you're not going to change them, you just understand them now? Tell us how that affects you individually.
So, it's a couple of different ways, but I'll first talk about it in the realm of sort of one-on-one. When I'm in a diversity, equity, and inclusion training, I actually found it so helpful to have that mindset. One, knowing that there's nothing I can say or do to change anyone. But two, it keeps this angst, this urgency, this tightness, I gotta save the world, I gotta convince them, out of me. And so I mean, frankly, I breathe easier. I breathe deeper. When I can get curious about what may have brought somebody to a point where they feel this way, they say these things, or they do these behaviors, it feels much more settling in my body than either one, blaming myself, questioning, like, what did I do to make them do this? Or two, creating this really simple, they're just inherently bad, they're evil, and there are always going to be these inherently bad, evil people in the world. And this is just a scary place to, I don't know, it just feels different for me to settle into a place of curiosity and questioning and witnessing rather than sort of the angst of either blaming myself or even blaming them.
Yeah, that's my experience too, is I feel such an ease in my body. And I think when I have an ease in my body, I'm less likely to be dominant to other
Mhm.
people because I've seen people that I know. I live in a small town, so I get the pleasure of seeing lots of different people in circumstances you don't see everybody in. And I have friends and colleagues and past clients that are really connected to their story about the other in a negative way, like what I would call a dehumanizing story.
Yeah.
And when you see somebody simply for their action, to me, that's dehumanizing. It's like if someone's just a murderer, that's all they are, you've dehumanized them. And that's hard to say, hard people maybe to hear out loud, because obviously I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with someone murdering someone. I don't think people that can't control hurting people should be free. I think it's a privilege to be in society with each other. And if you consistently are going to hurt people, you need some remediation there. I do believe in that. So I'm not saying you just let people do what they want and there's this kind of chaos. But what I'm saying is when you dehumanize someone, something in that act of dehumanizing them, even in your own mind. So let's say you say nothing out loud. This isn't about cancel culture, just in you're living with a dehumanized opinion about somebody else. You've just entered into the same posture and the same biology of the person that dehumanized somebody else, even if it's like less of an extreme. Like you killed somebody, let's say. And then when I think you're a horrible, evil person that should be killed, that thought, what does that do in my body and how do I treat people? And the reason I was saying this is I know, a handful of people that really live with that anger toward the world and the presidents and whoever it is. And I'll see them driving through town and I'll see somebody like pull out in front of them or like a child and a mother like run across the street and they're beeping and screaming and laying on their horn. And I'm seeing this expression coming from such an activated state of that grip you're talking about. Because I don't think it feels good for any of us to dehumanize each other. Like even if it makes sense, like we can justify it and everyone would agree, because most people would agree with dehumanizing someone that's done something bad. It doesn't feel good in our body. So I think what fascinates me and why I wanted to have this conversation, because I just don't hear it enough, except for literally in biblical text and like Buddhist texts, is when I don't dehumanize someone that's oppressed somebody else, I break the chain in me. And then how do I break the chain in my relationship with others in a way I don't even know?
Hmm. Well, the I find that a lot of times, how do I say, like what you just described, like breaking the chain, doing things differently is terrifying because of that overcoupling. Whereas if I do that, if I break the chain, one of two things may be happening. One, I'm just sort of becoming a wet blanket. I'm going to let anything and everything happen to me. I'm not going to set boundaries. I'm not going to fight for equity or justice. Um, or two, that release, it feels really like it literally feels scary in the body. Like there's that protection where like if I'm amped up, if I kind of got my dukes up, I'm always on in that activated perpetual state. There is a level of at least somewhat perceived protection.
Mhm.
And to release that, I think for many of us feels incredibly defenseless. It feels way too vulnerable, even outside of whatever maybe political or social topic you're talking about. But just the idea of settling, opening, softening is too much for many people to be with.
Especially in response to the subject we're talking about.
Yeah.
if you see someone oppressing someone, like you see it, or you've been, or you see the dynamics of it happening, and to be soft in the face of that, I think is really unusual because you're taught to just harden against people that are hardened.
Mhm.
And I think, again, it's interesting because we're just reflecting their state back to them. There's no transmuting that can occur there. You're literally becoming them on some level. And I think what really humbles me, I was talking to Amber about this the other day, that what humbles me is knowing I have the potential for harm. Like I'm no different.
Yeah.
That for whatever reason, and this is where, privilege, not in the political term, but the actual experience of what, like I would even say gratitude might be a better word here. I have so much gratitude that for whatever reason, at so far in this part of my life, I haven't lost my mind. I've been through a lot of things, haven't lost my mind. And I think of people that actually lose their minds, that lose the ability to witness themselves, that lose the felt sense of empathy so they can harm somebody. And I mean harm. I'm not talking about offending someone with a joke. I mean harming somebody, like ending someone's life or putting them in a position where they are just being tortured or abused or using power over somebody in a really painful manner, manipulative manner. And I guess I'm saying that because it humbles me to know I have the same potential. So I kind of see it almost, and maybe it's not almost, maybe it is a narcissistic expression we all fall into when we talk shit on the oppressor and we go into dehumanizing them together and we all kind of get off on it. There's this
Mhm.
strange mob mentality that happens, and I watch it happen at birthday parties and in conversations with people at the grocery store when you start talking about something someone says something really horrible about, and I'm just using the archetype of oppressor for the purpose of this conversation. They say something really horrible about the oppressor, and everyone dives in to kind of, like bathe in the blood of this person, metaphorically speaking. And they're all getting off on it. And again, it doesn't feel good in my body to get off on throwing pain at somebody, even someone that's caused harm. So I'm just kind of landing there for a moment to see both of you. I'd like to hear, what do you notice in your body happen? What happens in your body when you find yourself, or you think of times in your life where you've contributed to dehumanizing somebody because of the harm they cause? Like what happened, not whether it's right or wrong, but what happens in your body?
Yeah, I totally um, somatically have such a constriction around that. Um, Getting into the habit of dehumanizing someone, I feel like there's such a fixity that comes with that, and a lack of fluidity, both in terms of the way I might be thinking of a person or a group of people, or in the actual sensation of itself in my body. Like if I think about, and it's so interesting to me too. I feel like it keeps coming up the way that these things are internalized,
Mhm.
the same way that a traumatic event can really create a sensation and experience in the body that really gets stuck and doesn't transmute. Um, in the same way, this kind of dehumanizing of another person it's something that ends up, we can carry in ourselves, it can carry over into our behaviors. And I think it's really interesting that bring a somatic approach to this conversation where you can temporarily remove story and just look at what's happening in the body and look at what's maybe happening in the bodies of other people and then how we're all relating as a whole. Um, I think it brings a lot more nuance and empathy to it, to the experience.
Mhm. Absolutely. How about you, Camille?
Um, when I reflect on when I've engaged in that, it's always felt very dissociative.
Mm.
Um, like for me, mob mentality, it's just where you get caught up in this wave and you're really not present. You're reciting the scripts, things you're supposed to say, sort of
Mhm.
reflecting what's being done in front of you. Um, and I found like I do that for one of two reasons, and maybe sometimes a combination of the two. But that dissociation helps me from being with what actually might be present in my body. So whether it's I'm experiencing the oppression and marginalization, or I'm empathizing with the group of people that is, it might be so overwhelming that I actually don't want to be with that. So I dissociate into dehumanizing the oppressor. But the other thing it can keep me from being with, and you were sort of speaking to this, it keeps me from being with any sort of curiosity or notions of how I'm actually an oppressor myself, how I'm contributing to the state of oppression and marginalization. It may not be in the same degree or the same way as this person or entity we're all pontificating on, but that's really uncomfortable to be with. Like, how am I right now contributing to the oppression or marginalization of others? And that's a question I find most of us don't have the capacity to sit with.
I really appreciate all that because over the weekend I went to New York City and I had worked there, and then Thursday night I had not work but pleasure, you could say. Eamon and I went to Jack Soul, who's a colleague and becoming a friend of mine. He does incredible work around PTSD and trauma and something called moral injury, which is about when people are put into situations or put themselves in situations where they do something against their integrity because they have to. So in this case, he's working with war veterans who do things in other countries they would never do. It's like goes against the grain of who they are, but they've been conditioned or put in a situation where that's what they do. And I was thinking about this podcast we're doing today while I was watching the show, because it was a soundscape where you sit in a room with like, I don't know, 200 people, and you listen for 30 minutes to these interviews that he's done with war veterans. And what was fascinating was, looking just about the curiosity piece, what was fascinating was, actually, there's so much coming up now. I'm having one of those ADHD moments where like, which one do I start with? I'll start with the dissociation, because that's what came up for me when I listened to this, was you're hearing these people say how painful, you're hearing these military personnel saying how painful it was for them, how they can't sleep at night, how they hate themselves, how they don't want to be alive. And you're also hearing their helplessness. And when I was a teenager, I was like an anti-war activist. I was like really, really intense about it. And I remember dehumanizing the soldiers all the time. I just thought they were like scum of the earth. Like that's how I saw them, even though my cousin was one. And I remember thinking they're just horrible and what's wrong with them. And I'd prefer to be poor than try to get like an easy ticket out. All these ideas. And then I'm sitting back. I don't think that at all anymore, but I was sitting back kind of in touch with that part of myself while listening to these stories. And I was sensing how helpless these men and women were telling the story, how they were told where to go and what doors to kick down and who to shoot and what bomb to drop. They had no idea why. They never got to go back and see what happened. They were just used almost like pawns from this huge military industrial complex, and I have no idea why. And I felt this helplessness in them. And then I noticed what you just said. When I go to dehumanize them or the president or whoever it is in the war and the battle, it helps me escape my own helplessness, because people in the room were sobbing. They were holding each other. We did somatic work beforehand of like, hold your heart and your belly if you feel something big. So it was an embodiment practice for the group to listen as well. And what happened were all these people, like 200 strangers in New York City, having a moment of helplessness together, feeling their pain. And then one woman did what you just said. She got curious because there was a weaving at the end. She stood up and said, "It's really interesting for me because I'm realizing right now how I contribute to the war on Instagram." Everyone's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "I post things and repost things that contribute to division, whether it's division of Democrats and Republicans, whether it's division of Israelis and Palestinians, whether it's division of black and white, like whatever it is. I'm contributing to a story of how someone is less or different than the other and dividing them." And she said, "I wonder how many of us do that without realizing it, and how our children grow up with parents like us teaching them about division, and then someone comes into their school saying, 'Hey, you can go to the army and work on this thing.'" And it was this amazing kind of responsibility of how do I culturally contribute. And it was so grounding and it was so settling. But that only came because we sat in the helplessness together. We didn't dive right into what's so horrible or how can we fix this.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the mob mentality thing wasn't able to happen because it was a regulated environment where people weren't just co-dysregulating in horror. They were having to sit with their feelings, and their feelings brought them to places inside themselves. So I just wanted to land that for a moment and see what comes up.
Well, we've laughed about this a couple of times. Could you imagine, like, if we got to rejigger the way 24-hour cable news is set up. Like instead of headline after headline, debate, pontificate, what if there was a headline? All right, now everybody, let's take a moment and be with that. Comes up.
Notice how safe you are in the chair right
Yeah.
now. Let's feel those feet.
How does that make you feel? But the structure of it is immediately, okay, this is the headline. Now we got to figure out who's to blame. Now what are we supposed to do? But there's no space, intentionally so, for just being with what is, not jumping to a solution, not jumping to who's to blame, but just being with the event itself and what impact that's having on you right now.
Yeah, and I think when you said about dehumanizing gives you a break from your body, it's dissociative, it's reflexive. When Evan's saying the feeling of this immense constriction, which earlier, like we teach, it feels defenseless, it feels vulnerable. It's like, this is why I love curiosity and empathy. It's teaching me how you got to be the way you are.
Yes.
Like when I'm looking at the oppressor, oh, I see the steps that happened that got you here. And I guess I'm curious, I'm going to ask a question to see where you two go with it. Why is it so controversial to empathize with a horrible person? I do it all the time. I piss people off every day for doing it. So I want to know. I can't figure it out.
I think it goes back to the idea of empathizing means you're condoning it or you're excusing it.
So
and I think it is that because there is the historical context of, there have been groups of people who've done bad things and they haven't been policed or they haven't been punished. They didn't, get punished to the full extent of the law to the same degree that other groups did. And yeah, that absolutely happened. But I think something is really important that you said, and this is the nuance. This is why nuggets don't really work. No, you clearly said individuals who impede on other people's agency, they need to be punished. Being able to engage with people, that is a privilege that we earn. And if you can't, all that is clear. And I can also still have curiosity for what brought them to that space. What were the steps? Because none of us come shooting out the womb like that. So
That's right.
Something happened, something took place. And what were those things? Because I am very much of the same mentality as you are. The saying goes, but for the grace of God, go I. Like there is very easy. I could be in some similar situations. I could easily be radicalized because of which is for me, it's just a form of unmetabolized, unmet trauma. The quote unquote littlest things could happen to radicalize me. So if I can recognize that in myself, I can certainly be curious about it potentially happening in another person.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I can think of 3 or 4 times in my life I've been radicalized, where I was in an echo chamber of beliefs and ideas, and they allowed me to have somewhere for my off-gassing of my unmetabolized trauma, my rage, my sadness, disempowerment, all those things I felt from my history. It gave me a place to let that out. And in my experiences of being radicalized, we dehumanize the other. I know I keep pissing people off with this vegan thing, but it's like, it was amazing to consider now that I'm several years out of it, how intensely dehumanizing it could be. And I want to say could be, because I know a lot of vegans that are incredible human beings who are very inclusive of all people, and they're open-minded and they don't impose anything. And they're really doing it because they believe it's the best thing to do. And they do a lot of good. They help a lot of animals and other humans. And I respect them so much. And then there's a lot of groups I've been in where the whole conversation at dinner is literally over your delicious organic vegan meal is talking about how horrible everyone in a slaughterhouse is and how they should be slaughtered. And I'm like, wait a minute, I thought we were the peaceful ones. And I've had the same thing with Democrats. I've had the same things with Republicans where I've gone into these groups because I believe in something they believe in, or I don't, I get curious, and I see how they dehumanize each other. And so I just get fascinated in how quickly someone who is mentally sound like me, if I can be radicalized that quickly, what about someone else that doesn't have the same center?
Yeah, I feel like for me, the fawn response is just really being present in this conversation, how just the desire to be accepted by any group, how quickly it can really kick in, and then where it can lead from there. And I think I spend a lot of time really nerding about like different systems theory. And I don't even know how to describe this in a straightforward way, but mostly it's focusing more on the system or the relationship between people or parts or whatever it is than the individual parts. So it's a very holistic approach to, like, for the body. Instead of focusing necessarily on, say, the stomach and the liver, you focus on the relationship between the stomach and the liver. So you're not looking at them as two separate things. You're looking at how do they relate to each other.
Exactly how I was trained in nutrition.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of this so applies to the conversation of oppressor empathy as well, because just the dynamics that really, I can't really think of a situation where a singular person who was oppressive was able to, I mean, maybe on a micro scale, but especially on a macro scale, there has to be like a system or an organization around it, that really brings it back to like the way, the relationship with people and like the way that we hold these things.
Hey, my friends. I created a space that is affordable, accessible, and anyone is allowed to join anytime, and it's called the Library Membership. The Library Membership is an online private platform that hosts dozens of my webinars, my somatic practices, private mini lectures, and movement practices. There's also a monthly sound healing, and you'll be invited to a weekly Tuesday live mini practice with me and other participants. You'll also be invited to be a live audience member in our monthly HLN team podcast recordings, where you'll take place in the Q&A that happens off air after the episode is filmed. For more information on this membership, click on the link below, or go to holisticlifenavigation.com and click on membership and then library. You can join right now, and you can cancel or pause your subscription at any time. I look forward to seeing you in there. That's what really came up for me in this soundscape that I listened to on Friday or Thursday around these war veterans, because I was getting this sense of, we've met and you've heard people who are military families, and so it's like in their lineage, it's a really big part of pride. It's part of their religion. Like, they deeply, deeply believe in keeping that alive. So you're talking about, in this case, men predominantly that come back from war completely broken from the trauma of moral injury, things they did that were against their integrity, suddenly expected to be nurturing, loving partners and fathers with no help assimilating back into regular culture. And I'm thinking, like, how many centuries has that been a pattern where every 30 or 40 years, and there's a major war, whether it's here like Civil War and such, or it's international wars, do men come back and have no relational skills because they're so broken from the war? And that's where this oppressor empathy with men really became clear for me, because I first listened to this in February and listened to it again on Thursday. And I got this deep sense of softness in my heart and chest for some of the men I know, and a lot of the people I work with who were abused, by these grandfathers and fathers who were been in this militarized system. And so I'm saying this in response to what you said, because this container that held them, and the majority of these people are exploited. They're the ones in poverty. They're exploited in high school, to go do this so they can get out of ever having student loan debt, or they can get out of ever being impoverished. And there's this promise of this security and this love and this belongingness. And just in this case with going to war, but the intergenerational reverberations of someone coming back with the inability to connect. And then we go out and shame them for having toxic masculinity, without any conversation about, well, what abuse and horror did they go through to even have this masculine dominance erupt? And so for me, there's two things lacking. Well, there's already a traumatized body being shamed, so that's not very helpful. And then without the curiosity and understanding kind of the steps of getting there, how do you even implement a strategy to help someone heal from that if you don't know the beginnings of it? if you just see their behavior as who they are, you've lost all possibility at possibly rehabilitating this person. And what you said earlier, Camille, about reflecting what I said about the privilege of connecting to people and being part of society. I was seeing you as a mother, and I'm like, there's no way if Jamal was just hitting Khadijah, you just sit there and be like, he's upset because he didn't get his cookie. Like, you wouldn't do that. You would understand he's upset he didn't get his, and Jamal didn't do this, by the way. I'm just using an example. You understand he's upset he didn't get his cookie, and you need to go to your room. You can't be in a room with her. I don't trust you right now. So it's like we can hold both of, you need to go into jail, and we're not going to dehumanize you there. We're going to work with you, but we need to keep you from people you might hurt. Can we just talk about that? Because people listening are going to think it's like this kind of snowflake concept, but I want to bring the reality in.
No. That's a perfect example. And for me, that's sort of the distinction between like that and gentle parenting, which for me, gentle parenting would be like, oh, he's going to hit her. That happened. No, you don't get to hit my baby, even if you are also my baby. Bye. Go to another room.
Baby.
Okay.
Bye, boy. See you later.
And I don't have to just say, oh, Jamal is all kinds of fucked up. He's just a bad kid. I raised him wrong. This is just the way he is. Oh, I can, once he's in his room, I can go be with him. I can say, can you help me understand what was going on when you were hitting Khadijah? And we have systems where we can talk about emotions or feelings. Like we talk about, were you in the red zone? Were you in the yellow zone? And then from there, you can kind of work down to what he was really feeling. But that, for me, fundamentally goes back to what you just said. We can hold both. I'm just not a person for binary thinking. For me, if we are in a state of binary thinking, we are in the midst of a trauma response. So if it's this or that, yes or no, black or white, that's a signal to me that I need to pause and take a step back. And that there's actually there's some gray, there is some nuance there for me to be with.
That's right. And even when, I don't know why when you were saying, I was thinking of how you said earlier, curiosity of how I do it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking a lot about, we were talking about Israel and Palestine. We've been talking about it, like everyone, I'm sure. And what fascinates me, again, just by knowing people and seeing how they live in many different ways in my town, my friends and such, people that have been very shaming of others, let's say, who won't hashtag ceasefire or who won't make a post about what one side should or shouldn't do because that's just not their way. Not that they don't believe a certain thing, but it's just not their way. These same people that would demand this country stop or do something different, these are the people that have worked with me for years in one-on-one sessions to just go to Thanksgiving dinner and sit there with their father. Like, they can't even be at a table with their dad, who's a Republican, let's say, as one. Yet they expect that a country with such deep cultural wounds and conflict should stop doing it because we tell them to.
Yeah. And
people on Instagram or someone else should tell them what to do because of what's right or wrong. And I find that fascinating that without the curiosity, in your own small, tedious way, you're reenacting the same thing you're trying to be against.
Oh, you are. Let's play with this. I'm going to piss some people off, but this will be fun. Okay.
Let's play with this one.
So I always find it fascinating for myself and for other people to get curious about the underlying sensation motivating the behavior. Sure, you may want to post something in support of Palestine. What I'm curious about is that coming from a place of expansion and ease in your body? Or is that coming from a place of constriction and urgency? If the latter, I find that there is something there for me to explore. That there is something, maybe in coupling, maybe an internalization, something is going on where the thing motivating the quote unquote good behavior isn't necessarily coming from a quote unquote good place. And so I find that we can often meet one person's or one side's trauma response with our own trauma response instead of, again, noticing how we may want to navigate the situation from a place of expansion or ease or curiosity. We instead go to judgment, constriction, and urgency.
It's interesting because I was talking to people at dinner before the soundscape about that, what you just said. About the sensation that leads it. And we were talking about how what we all had in common at this dinner was in our late teens and early 20s, we were all activists. And I know some people think I don't like activists. That's not the reality. I have no issue actually with activists. I don't like being told what to do.
Yeah.
That's true. So don't tell me what to do. I'm not going to listen. But unless you're right. But I'm not going to listen unless you're right. Let's underline that one. If you're right, I will listen. But I don't have really an opinion on activists until I meet somebody and I see what they're about and such. But I remember when I was an activist, that was exactly how I lived. I was so, all my behavior and expressions were from constriction. And when I investigated the underlying charge, years later, it was my desperation to belong to something. That's
Mm,
where it all came down
yeah.
to. And I had a lot of, would it be shame? I'm just going to call it shame. I had a lot of shame, maybe guilt, maybe humiliation when I discovered that, because I realized in the names of actual oppressed people, I'm getting off. You
Mm,
know what I'm saying? Like I was making it about animals, or I was making it about black people, or I was making it about natives, or I was making it about Afghanistan at the time because of the war.
yeah.
But I was using that as a way to belong and feel powerful. I mean, how, for me, insanely privileged is that? Like
Mhm.
using someone else's actual conflict of life to to belong to something. And when I felt that and I found that, I can still feel the, like when I got in touch with that, I was like, whoa, I need to repent. I'm doing quotes,
Yeah.
but I really felt like I needed to repent to myself. I'm like, I've been totally under the spell of thinking I'm doing one thing when really I'm getting a dopamine hit of belonging by using the names of people who are suffering. And so once I did that, then I found for me, my activism was how I lived my life.
Yeah.
It wasn't what I told others. So I just want to see where we go with that. And the expansion leads me there, right? When I'm in that, like getting off of Instagram, it's 5 weeks, y'all. 5 weeks. And
Ooh.
if the expansion is just growing more and more. Because even though I wouldn't even though I wouldn't call it activism,
Yeah.
there's still this, this throwing out your ideas and kind of telling people
Yeah.
your story. And I started feeling a constriction. I thought, I just want to live my beautiful, I don't want to talk about my beautiful life. I want to live my beautiful life. So where do y'all go with that? I'm curious.
Oh, okay. Let me get my autistic brain straight. So many, so many different pathways are connecting here. So what you just said about Instagram really resonates with me, and talking about oppressors and Instagram. And I'm going to try to make this make sense. I think it would be easy for people. Oh, let me give some background. So I just got on Instagram like 6 months ago. Because I was working through some things around being seen and my own resistance to it. And I'm in a place where I feel really comfortable being on Instagram. It could be really easy for someone to say, but wait, you work with Louise and he just got off Instagram. Then he's saying that's not right for him or that's not the right thing to do, but you just got on it and you're doing it from a place of ease and expansion. And I am. And so this is what I mean by like the action itself isn't what's important. It's about noticing what is the underlying sensation behind it. Like if I were to get off Instagram just because Luis isn't on Instagram anymore, that would actually be coming from a place of constriction and urgency in my body. Whereas I'm now in a place where how I'm choosing to share, what I'm choosing to share actually feels really subtle, really
Mhm.
easeful, and there's a flow to it. And I'm connecting this back to what you were saying around how you show up now in terms of activism is how you live your life. It's not these one and done kind of flash in the pan or really making a show trying to point the finger at other people. It's about what are the choices that I'm making on a consistent and persistent basis that support the values, the people, the organizations that are in alignment with how I see my life or what I want to see perpetuated in the world. I know
Mhm.
that was a lot.
No, that's exactly where it is for me. Yeah, then and that softness for me of not making it a show.
Yeah.
And I know I don't know, I'm assuming it's gonna sound harsh for some people, like, excuse me, this isn't a show. This is like someone's life we're yelling for. And I respect that. It might be. For me, it wasn't. For me, it was like I was yelling these ideas or these names or these movements and beliefs. But it was like you said, it was mob mentality. I stuck to the belief that a certain group was agreeing with. And I loved that I had a secure attachment to this group if I met the belief. And the moment I questioned the belief, the group's like, you need to watch out or you're out. And whenever I'm in a situation like a group dynamic or even at one-on-one, and I can't have any dissenting opinions or beliefs, and like it's not allowed, that's my cue to walk away like fast. Because the part of me that's insecure, like the little parts left over from, growing up and just the relational trauma and such, that say I want to be loved no matter what, like Evan was saying, those fawning techniques, they come up quick. And so I'll bypass my question or my curiosity or my controversial idea and just go right to agreeing with you, because that dopamine hit of you loving me because I agree with you is so delicious. It's so delicious. But then, when you're embodied, it's not as delicious, because what's really happening in that fawn response is dissociation. And when you get embodied, it's like association doesn't feel as good as it used to. You actually want to be more associated to the experience and the relationships. Where do you go with that, Evan? Like, what are you hearing from all this?
I feel like I'm always struck by, I think this is something you've brought up a bunch of times, and I guess it's really more of a question, but like when you're really embodied versus when you're dissociated, like in what state is it that you could purposefully or accidentally, either way, cause harm? And just how I feel like so many ways, like the practice of being embodied, the practice of being present is, I don't want to say a solution, but almost a solution to that. And especially when you're talking about the group dynamics, about how when the fawn response is kicking in and you're in these big groups and you're not able to bring your full self, which I mean, I've fully experienced as well, then there's this kind of contagious dissociation that happens. And then that, when there's a lot of people, that has then created, a group that could very easily, even unknowingly, cause harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you were saying that, it's like a solution, I was really feeling it's like a tool, isn't it? Because when, Camille, you're always bringing up the expansion and constriction piece, and it's something I've taught on, but you really have made it a big part of your practice in the way you teach. And I'm glad, because it's that simplicity people have to be reminded of. It's that simple. Like, embodiment is not an elitist idea. It's simple. It's not esoteric. It's like you're constricted, you're expanded. And my constriction tells me when something's not right for me. If I'm not overcoupled, which is a whole other podcast, we already have it. You can scroll back. But when it's environmentally, when it's a response to my environment, it's my body saying back off. Like you want to listen to constriction. But when it's expanded, it's your body saying, no, this is right for me. So if I'm having a conversation with someone and we're all seemingly agreeing about something and I'm tightening up, that's a really good somatic awareness that there's some fawning strategy happening underneath this seemingly connected experience. I think it's important to ground into that around this topic. I love how we all just grounded into that.
So my mind just went blank. I was just like, yeah.
And me too. I'm like, yeah, there we go. Let's just do this.
There it is. That's grounding for you.
Okay, well, you have a good day. Thank you. I don't know if I have anything else to say. I think I'm really bored of hate.
I like how you said that. I'm being bored of hate, because
basic bitch.
I really appreciate because it does take me back. I know my expansion and constriction. It really is that simple. Like, I'm bored with hate because it fundamentally is rooted in constriction. It's rooted in fear, and that's what I'm more curious about. But like, quote unquote, ending hate, it's just not this. For example, it's just not the way I do my DEI practice. Like, it's not. I don't focus on, here's a list of all the microaggressions you shouldn't say or do, or here's a list of all the different privileges and you should feel guilty because of those privileges. Or for me, diversity, equity, inclusion is rooted in the capability or the capacity to get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, to have the capacity for gray, for nuance, to have the capacity to ask questions, to be asked questions, and not necessarily go into a place of defensiveness or judgment. So yeah, I get it. Like, I'm just kind of bored with hate. It's just
boring.
Been there, done that.
Been there, done that.
It's just not
same old.
Not anywhere I
New
think I
name,
want
same
my body to
sensation.
be. Like, you like it, I love it. You do you, but I'm
Well, and I have to say, Camille and I were percolating an episode just around DEI because, and I'll say this on the record,
There
Camille
you
is
go.
the only person I know that I have met so far that does DEI unpoliticized. It's amazing. And when I first met you and you're like, I do DEI, I was like, oh, I liked her until she said that. And then, I was like, just because of what I've sat through and who I've met. And then
Yeah.
when I got to talking to you and seeing you do it, I'm like, damn, she actually does real DEI, which is like straight up teaching everyone, regardless of what's popular, regardless of politics, regardless of, there's no oppressor and oppression dynamics. She's truly in the group she's in to teach them how to relate to each other. I mean, it's that simple. And part of it is exactly what you said. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You
Mhm.
can't have a diverse group together and not trigger each other. You can't. It's not going to happen. So the friendships and the connections and the relationships have to be built on conflict.
Mhm.
And so I think it's just a brilliant, I can't wait to have our episode because, you know, we talked on the phone the other day. I brought you like things that really don't sit well with me, and you so beautifully hold them and speak to them. And I think it's going to be just a great episode because it's gotten a bad rep for a lot of people because of how it's been
Yes.
held. But its
Yes.
ability is quite powerful when someone with an unmetabolized trauma response is holding it, just like anything. This is
I
the
was
whole
going to say
conversation
just
full
like with
circle,
anything.
right?
Yes.
Right? Like you're going into a room to teach people how to be connected, and they're leaving with more constructs that divide them if you
Mhm.
have unmetabolized trauma and bias. And so any person situation can become an oppressive one if you're not, in my opinion, embodied. I mean, who do you know that does DEI with embodiment practices? Come on. Come on. Bring it on. Who do you know?
I don't in the traditional. This is funny because I was actually working with somebody the other day, and they were saying like, "So who?" This is going to sound so bad. I can't believe I'm
I'm sure
recording
it
this,
is. Let's just do
but
it.
they were like, "So, just let us know like who are some of the DEI people you tend to follow?" And I was like, "Ooh, I
Mm,
actually don't follow
I
any."
unfollow
And
them.
they're trying to do research on the industry. I'm just like, I don't know. Just because I went to DEI trainings and they were on two ends of the spectrum. Either they were too fucking polite and nobody wanted to say gay or black, or it was on the other end of the spectrum and it felt very preacherish. I'm gonna wag my finger at you. I'm gonna tell you what's wrong with you. And
Right.
neither one of those felt right to me. They were in my opinion and experience, just two different forms of trauma responses, reflexive in nature, and they lacked embodiment. And for me, it was about let's slow it down. Okay, I just said the word black. Pause. That freaks some of y'all out. Let's just be with that, and like really taking it slow. And yeah. But yeah, we'll have a whole podcast about
Oh
that.
yeah, we have to. I mean, when people are like, "What nutritionist do you recommend?" Until I met Unique, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know any nutritionists that love the body.
Hmm.
It's like so many are about like what's wrong with your body, and I'm like, what about the ones that just fucking love the body and love
Yeah.
to eat, like the pleasure eating? Where are those? Now we have them, we found them, but for a long time they didn't exist for the same reason. So I think going back to constriction expansion with the embodiment practices again, I find it very hard. I'm not going to say I find it hard to not be oppressive. I find it hard to ignore my oppressive tendencies. And when
Mm,
I am oppressive, when I'm embodied. And that's more the humility practice of like you can't
yeah.
get rid of your oppressive tendencies. Like everyone has them. Anyone ever raise a 2 or 3 year old? It's like
Hmm.
we're born with the tendency to overpower things and to put ourselves first. Like that's there. And there's this other part that witnesses that can be in relationship with that. But again, I think what I'm getting from this talk, I think so important, is when I go into dehumanizing and pointing my finger and having constructs about people because of what they've done, it just temporarily numbs me out to how I'm doing it. Really, that's all it really comes down to. Well, that's the end of our show, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have found more empathy for the oppressor out there as we have. We're going to
The
turn to
oppressor out there and the oppressor in here.
good God, good God. Hope you found more empathy for the oppressor inside yourself as we are. So if you have any questions about this, let us know in the comments. I would love to see what y'all are thinking about this. I can do a direct YouTube episode in response to some questions and comments, but try to be nice if you can be, but if not, I can handle it. We're going to go to we have a nice little audience of people that are part of our community and library membership. So we do this 30-minute weaving and Q&A after the the podcast just for them. So if you want to be part of that, you can also do that through the link below of the library membership. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Camille, Marika. I hope you are listening to this. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.